Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn, the result of his relationship with Hagar, his mother. Hagar was an Egyptian servant of Sarah, Abraham's wife. God had promised Abraham that he would give him numerous descendants, even though he was already advanced in age. However, Sarah was barren, and according to the custom of the time, she offered her servant, Hagar, to Abraham, so that an heir for the family could be born. Thus, the biblical story of Ishmael begins, and in this video, we will understand who Ishmael was, as described in the Bible. Ishmael was born when Abraham was already 86 years old. According to biblical texts, we see that Abraham had great affection for Ishmael, and even asked God to accept him as the promised heir. However, when Ishmael was about 13 years old, God renewed his promise to Abraham, who at the time was already 99 years old. Once again, God assured that he would give Abraham a descendant from his wife, Sarah. God also ordered that all the men in Abraham's household be circumcised as a sign of his covenant. Since Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised, some Arab tribes preserved the custom of circumcising their boys at the same age. About a year later, Isaac was born, and the birth of Sarah and Abraham's biological son caused a series of conflicts between Sarah and Hagar. Since Ishmael's birth, Sarah and Hagar had already disagreed. The biblical text reports that after becoming pregnant, Hagar began to despise Sarah. At this point, Hagar was completely mistaken because, according to the laws of the time, a fertile slave should never confront the barren wife. If this happened, the special servant designated to bear the heir of the family could be demoted to a common slave. According to this practice, Sarah had the right to afflict Hagar due to her contempt. Nevertheless, Hagar ended up fleeing into the desert, afraid of Sarah. However, in the desert, the angel of the Lord appeared to her and ordered her to return to Abraham's household. It was also in the desert that the angel revealed that the son she was expecting should be named Ishmael. The name Ishmael means God hears, as the Lord had heard Hagar's affliction, as recorded in Genesis 16 verse 11. The conflict between Sarah and Hagar reached its peak when Isaac was weaned. During Isaac's weaning feast, Ishmael mocked his brother, which deeply offended Sarah. She demanded that Abraham expel Hagar and her son, as recorded in Genesis 21. However, Sarah's request went against the customs of the time. According to the rules of that era, Ishmael was a legitimate son not only of Abraham but also of Sarah, since he had been born of her personal servant. In extreme cases, a master's child with a servant could lose his position within the family but never be expelled. Naturally, this caused great sorrow for Abraham. However, God spoke to the patriarch, assuring him not to worry about Ishmael, for the Lord would care for Hagar's son and bless him with a great lineage. The Bible does not provide details about everything that motivated Sarah's request to expel Ishmael and Hagar. However, it seems that more than a specific action of Ishmael, Sarah saw him as a threat to her biological son's position within the family. After being comforted by God, Abraham dismissed Hagar and Ishmael. They left with bread and water, but at a certain point, the water ran out, and they feared for their lives. The biblical account says that at that moment, Hagar placed Ishmael under a tree and moved away, so she wouldn't see her son die. Many people imagined that Ishmael was still a small child, but he was already a teenager, about 16 years old. Nevertheless, in Genesis chapter 21, God rescues Hagar and Ishmael, renewing his promise that Ishmael would be a prosperous man. Ishmael went on to live with his mother in the desert of Beersheba and later in the desert of Paran. Although Isaac was Abraham's sole heir, Ishmael and the other sons of Abraham from outside his marriage to Sarah were also blessed, as we read in Genesis 25. This indicates that both Ishmael, son of Hagar, and the sons of Keturah received material blessings from the patriarch. Despite the disagreements between Ishmael, Isaac, Hagar, and Sarah, after reaching adulthood, the Bible no longer mentions conflicts between the two brothers. In fact, they appear together in Genesis 25, caring for the burial of Abraham and Machpelah. The Bible closes Ishmael's story by stating that he became a great hunter, skilled with a bow and arrow. Hagar arranged an Egyptian wife for him, with whom Ishmael had 12 sons and a daughter. Later, in chapters 28 and 36 of Genesis, we learn that Ishmael's daughter married Esau, Isaac's son. The names of Ishmael's sons are mentioned in Genesis 25 verses 13 to 15, and most of them are cited in other biblical passages as influential tribal families of that time. Ishmael's descendants are often identified in the Bible as Ishmaelites, organized into 12 tribes, living in mobile camps in the southern desert. The Bible also reports that Ishmael died at 137 years old, but it does not specify where he was buried. However, Muslim tradition asserts that he was buried in Mecca. Lastly, in the New Testament, Ishmael is mentioned particularly by the Apostle Paul in chapter 4 of his epistle to the Galatians. Paul used the figure of the servant son in his allegory about the opposition from legalistic religious groups who persecuted Gentile believers, those born according to the Spirit and enjoying freedom in Christ. Over time, the name Ishmael became relatively common. Therefore, other people are mentioned in the Bible by the name Ishmael. There was, for instance, a descendant of King Saul and Prince Jonathan named Ishmael. There was also a high-ranking official during the reign of King Jehoshaphat, as well as the son of a priest in Ezra's temple. However, among all the individuals mentioned by this name, the most well-known was the son of Nethaniah, who was a member of the royal house of David. This Ishmael became famous because, during the time of Babylonian oppression against the Jews, it was he who assassinated Gedaliah, the governor of Judah appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, as we read in the second book of Kings, chapter 25, and also in the book of the prophet Jeremiah, between chapters 40 and 41. Thus, to conclude our study on the story of Ishmael in the Bible, we can highlight some main points. Ishmael was not the son promised by God to Abraham, but even so, God took care of him. It was the Lord who chose the name Ishmael and destined him for greatness. Although he was outside the covenant, Ishmael was blessed with a great lineage, which was also organized into a tribal structure of 12 clans, just like Isaac's descendants. God also described Ishmael's character to emphasize the nomadic way of life of his descendants and the opposition his people would make to the children of the covenant. Over time, the descendants of Ishmael joined the Midianites, who were also descendants of Abraham through Keturah. Thus, in several biblical passages, the Ishmaelites and Midianites are essentially the same people. Today, the Arab people trace their ancestry to Abraham, primarily through Ishmael. And finally, in a broader sense, Ishmael's story in the Bible goes far beyond a personal biography. His narrative, in contrast to Isaac's, reveals much about God's work and the outpouring of His grace in the story of redemption. Ishmael was the natural birth of two fertile people, Abraham and Hagar. Isaac, on the other hand, was the supernatural birth that revealed the great power of God, who caused a barren 90-year-old woman to bear a child. This helps clarify Paul's indirect reference to Ishmael in the New Testament as a figure of the one born according to the flesh, in contrast with the one born according to the Spirit. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep exploring lesser-known stories of the Bible, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. And leave your comment below telling us which story you'd like to see in the next videos. Your participation is super important for us to keep bringing this kind of content. See you in the next video.